Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. And hello again. Here we are.
Hello.
We present to you us.
In all our fabulosity.
Yeah. It's weird not recording in person.
It is. Because I'm like, I don't know. Have your cats made any noise?
Not yet.
Because I was like, I have heard nothing.
I know, of course, right? But I have my door closed and I was expecting them to come give me shit because the door was closed. Because see, when you're in here, they're just going to avoid because there's a stranger. Yes. So it's fine. But I couldn't leave the door open with just me in here because the first thing when I opened it, Cleo wandered right in like, hello, here is my new area. And I was like, I don't want you in here. She's the one who started the peeing on things for the old cat.
Oh. I also have my office door closed, but Joe and Nikki know what's going on. But this office door, my new office, used to be Lucy's bedroom. So there's a cat door in the door. So if Evie or one of the cats really wanted to, they could come in. But it's like they haven't figured out I'm home. I don't know. Because usually I have a blanket, because there is a bed in here, a twin bed in here. And I have an old comforter on top of it in a pile, heaped in a pile, so that Evie can jump up there and nose around in it and make her nest. She usually comes in and sleeps for a while in the afternoon. I'm like, what? Nobody wants to sleep with me today.
Weird. Mine are probably just outside. I went out night before last, turned off a light that was on outside, and something large climbed over our fence and ran away. And I was like, wonder what that was, but I couldn't find it. Like I never saw it. So got too much stuff. Where I was, there were curtains, and then it was on the other side of the greenhouse. So it's like it could be so many things around here.
But if it sounded chonky, I'm betting raccoon.
Yeah, it didn't. I was like, it sounded sprier than that.
Oh.
So it could have just been a lynx.
Could have been.
So I don't know. I live in the suburban wildlife interface. As they call it, which nobody knew, by the way, until Waldo Canyon fire. So, it was on the news all the time. We were like, oh, that's what we're called? Cool. I just thought I was in suburbia in general and happened to butt up against a park.
Yeah.
Well, where I am, I'm between a park and Garden of the Gods Park, really. So lots of aminals. That's why I saw a coyote the other day.
Oh, that's right. You did post that. So are you reading anything good these days?
I just read Tender is the Flesh, and I can't remember the name of the author. It's a Spanish name. And when I honestly, I think Spanish versus like South American or Latin American, but I'm not positive about that. Don't quote me. And the whole premise, I just finished it last night, actually. The premise of it is that animals, like four-legged furry animals, are carrying a virus that kills people. And so very rapidly, the government switches to something where they're keeping people as livestock and the only edible meat is people. And it's not a secret. It's not Soylent Green. They have slaughterhouses. They call them anything but people. You're not allowed to eat anything with a name. That's one of the rules they've done. That's their moral rule. You can't eat anything with a name. If so, that's murder. But the head, as they call them, and stuff like that, basically the livestock,
wow,
those you can eat. They don't have names. They're branded, and they're branded each year. And then there's there's better quality ones. But then, of course, it goes a little into the dark market. And this guy who's operating, he used to have a wildlife safari type hunting thing. I mean, he's always been scuzzy is what I'm saying. And so what he does when it switches to humans is he moves. And then if there are celebrities who owe money to somebody, he will offer to pay them that money to settle their accounts, but they have to stay on his wildlife preserve for X amount of time. And if they live, they get that money. And if they get hunted down before then, well, sorry, they get eaten.
Wow.
So, and then he has these, and of course it's rich people, and then they have these big feasts, and they get to choose what parts they wanted, and like they're all having a feast over a guy who was a famous musician. So the prize, of course, is eating his tongue.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually a really good movie because it's all just put as this is how it is. You're not there for the horror at the beginning of the virus. And the thing is, a lot of people doubt it and they think the government engineered all this and that there's actually nothing wrong, that they were trying to stop overpopulation. But it's happening in other countries too. It's global. So they never tell you. It's really about the local experiences of a guy who works. Yeah, it's good. I think it was on a lot of the horror to read this year that was coming out. Maybe not last year. And so yeah, it was really good. What are you reading?
I'm reading The Doctor's Wife, and it's an older book. It's really funny. I have two very different opinions about the book, because it's kind of fascinating. It's literary fiction. So it follows the trope of they give you this horrific inciting incident, and then you have to go back months and follow every freaking character's storyline up till you get back to the present, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but it very much is a trope. It's used a lot. So on the one hand, it is kind of an interesting story because it involves a man. It's got two couples that are really kind of fascinating. One couple is the wife is a journalist and a teacher in a small Catholic school, and he's a doctor, and he gets recruited by the local family planning clinic to perform abortions. Which I was like, oh my God, this is so topical right now. But it is, like I said, it is an older book. The other couple is a famous artist and his wife is described as just being incredibly beautiful. And he met her when she was a teenager and painted her. So there's this very strange dynamic because it keeps hinting around that she was so young and he was so much older when he met her. Isn't it kind of weird that they're married now? Weird, abusive, what have you. And she has a lot of issues. So there is that. And it's an interesting story. And what happens in the beginning is the doctor is kidnapped. And you aren't sure who's kidnapped him or why. First, they beat the fuck out of him. I mean, it's terrible. Then they put him in his car and stage a car accident. And he gets dragged out of the car accident and they shove in the body of a drifter. It's the whole thing. So it is kind of, so I'm waiting for this all to come together because I'm like, why did they do this to him? I mean, I get that some people are anti-choice and don't believe in abortion. So I do get that, but I'm like, why go to these lengths of this severe beating in the car accident and all that? So on the other hand, it's set in Albany, New York. Okay. And that kind of drew me in because I'm like, okay, anything that's in that area of New York, it could be interesting. So, except there are very little details that keep drawing me out of the story. One is the author has sleet piercing the windshield.
Sleet piercing the windshield?
Uh-huh.
Like going through it?
I'm like, is it piercing means it's penetrating.
Right.
Whether or not it's going all the way through, I think. Yeah. So I'm like, is it really?
No.
And then she describes the hail as being yellow.
Ew.
And I was like, okay, Albany does not have that much pollution. It's not like Beijing.
It's not New York City.
So, and one of the other things was one of the characters is describing the people who live in Albany and how all their faces look like sad half-rotted potatoes. And I'm like, how did
Wow.
Albany hurt you?
Right. Have you even been there?
And they seem to have a good, because there's some of the stuff that they refer to makes me feel like they do know the area and some of the outlying area, like Gloversville and the descriptions. But I'm just like, if you think it's so fucking bleak, why set a book there?
Good Lord. So I finished. Did you ever read Love in the Time of Cholera?
I have not.
Okay.
I feel like I should have.
So I was
fancy.
bored out of my mind. Here's the thing. It's by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? And he's a gorgeous writer, like beautiful writing, for real. But I just didn't give a shit. Like, I didn't care about the characters. And there's the thing, I hit a point near the end, and had it been earlier, I probably would have stopped reading just because I wasn't that drawn in. Because it's like mundane, everyday lives for these two people who kind of start to court when they're younger, and then a series of things happens, and she kind of pushes them away, and she says not anymore, and then she eventually marries the doctor. So we see her daily life with the doctor, and until he dies, which is not a spoiler. It's on the back of the book because this is what this is about.
Okay.
Is that they live this they're like now in their 80s or something. Okay. And he has never committed to another woman because he still loved her. So it's this really long, drawn out, stalker-ish love story because he does stalk her. Like, he does know what she's doing and shows up at places he knows she'll be and stuff like that. And she never even acts like she recognizes him. So he doesn't know if she does. But anyway, near the end, he gets in a relationship, the whole thing. And on the back, it says he sleeps with 800 something women instead of committing to one woman, because committing to her would destroy his love, go against her or whatever, even though she doesn't act like she knows he's alive. He gets in a relationship with a girl, and it says she's in elementary school. Yeah. And I was like,
I was waiting for
school different in this time.
I was waiting for the word teacher.
Nope.
She's an elementary school
She's
teacher.
a child. At one point after they've had sex, he picks her up in her as she's getting dressed in her little school girl uniform so he can tie her shoes and fix her braids. And I was like, what the fuck?
I'm going to throw up in my mouth now.
And the thing is, he doesn't see anything wrong with it, but he knows he has to hide it. And then it goes on, and he's her legal guardian while she's at the school. She's away from her family to go to the school, and he's her legal guardian because they trust him, and he's filling out reports on her. And I was just so disgusted. And then I was like,
she should be.
I was like, why is this being put like this is okay? Like, it's not acknowledged that it's wrong, but then something happens and I'm like, well, does that tell me that he knew it was wrong? So I went and looked, and I was like, I like his writing. And if he had a book that was more interesting, it wasn't the most boring love story in the history of the fucking world. Because the whole point is the guy then pursues her after her husband dies, and they're having this romance in their 80s or whatever. And I'm waiting for a payoff, and then I'm just like, bleh. So anyway, I went and I looked in the back of the book, and it had the descriptors of a bunch of stories, and at least 2 others involve a man being involved with a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And I was like, at what point, like, how have I never heard about him? People bitch about Lolita all the time, but when they talk about Love in the Time of Cholera, I personally, at least, never heard that it was problematic or that anything about Marquez was problematic. And I'm like, are we just not acknowledging? Or did he speak out and say, like, of course this is all right? Like, I don't know. So now I'm disturbed, and I'm like, I don't. Did we just
bizarre.
Look at it? He wasn't a white American man, or
it's a different culture. That's what people will say. It's a different culture.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, is that why? Because they're like, I don't want to get in trouble for saying something about this, so I'm just going to say it was a different time. It was a different culture. It was a different whatever. So yes, I was very disturbed by that, and I was like, that is a book I would have loved to have discussed in a book club.
Yeah.
And I thought about posting about it, and I was like, I'm not in the mood right now to have somebody attack me for insulting Marquez,
Yep. Yeah.
But I was like, this is a recurring theme in his fiction. does that mean that he had like they're all over the dude who wrote Lewis Carroll or whatever, who wrote Alice in Wonderland for being a perv. And I'm like, but we're just going to pretend Marquez was it, or was he not? And we know this. Like, I don't know, but it really bothered me. So I needed to see if you'd read it.
I now I'm sorry I have not.
I mean, I don't know whether to recommend it or not.
Well, the last book I finished, because I'm still reading The Doctor's Wife, and I can't remember either the title or the author, because of course it's a YA mystery, and it's set. I'm trying to think if there are motor cars yet. It's set in London in an earlier time, and it is just fucking delightful. Because it's just a mystery, all these different mysteries interconnected and layered together. And, you know, of course, it all ties together at the end. And it was a fun little read.
Cool.
So it was a palate cleanser.
I think I went directly into a Just Lowry or Laurie book, and that's not going to be light and fluffy. From
which one? I just read one of hers not too long ago.
Oh, shoot. It's a newer one. I don't know, because I pulled it up, but here's the why I don't. Well, it's like I think I went into, because when I finished my last ebook, I just pulled up the next one and had it ready, and that was weeks ago. And I've been reading. I read then at least three paperbacks since then. And then I was like, okay, it's time to hop in and do an ebook, because otherwise I won't read the ebooks unless I go on trips. Because I do honestly prefer a paperback. I admit it, tree killer. But I'm like, I have all these great books on there. I need to go on there and read them. So I did it, and I jumped in, and I'm like, I don't know. It feels like it might be the Just Lowry one. And I know I considered starting one of hers, but now I don't know for sure it is. I'll figure it out.
I've got to update my Kindle before I go on my trip, because I've got a whole bunch of books that are ready to download onto the Kindle, but I haven't connected to the internet. Because that way, if you have a library book and you don't finish it, they don't yoink it back.
Right.
If you have no internet. Plus, it doesn't need to be connected to the internet on a daily basis.
I've done that, though. I was like, I had this library book and I need to finish it. And so I'm not turning this to like link in this. Oh, no, I forgot what I was going to say. So it doesn't matter. And anyway, it's a good time for you to get started.
It is. Speaking of abusing children. So,
wait.
It'll come around. It's really funny because I called this one, because I don't always, but sometimes I give them titles. So I called this one the Daybell douchebags. And then I thought, I feel awkward saying this, but I feel like that's really insulting to douchebags. So,
oh, wow.
And I've been wanting to talk about this case for quite some time, but it's a couple, the Daybells, and the woman was just sentenced. Her trial just completed. His has not yet, so I may have an update in the future. I will come back and let you know what happens. This was it was all over the news because they were pretty people, pretty white people. So Chad Daybell was born in Provo, Utah in August of 1968, and he grew up in the LDS Church. That's Latter-day Saints. Those are Mormons. And I will just tell you from the get-go, I don't hold them in any different regard than I do any other religion. Chad graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in journalism. This is this weird tangent. While he was there, he worked for 2 years in Springville Cemetery digging graves. He liked the exercise and the flexible hours. And 3 of his 4 younger brothers also held the same job after him. So it's like this family tradition. They work as grave diggers here.
I don't think it would be a terrible job if you were in shape,
or you'd rapidly get in shape.
Right? It wouldn't be, you don't have to mix with people or talk to people, it sounds great.
Yes. So they didn't expect that the baby of the family, Becky, would also follow suit. The family tradition, because girls can't dig graves. What was kind of odd was that Chad returned to the cemetery a few years later, but this time in the job of sexton, which is a person who looks after the grounds of the church and the graveyard, in addition to digging graves. Now, you would not like that job because that involves a lot of talking to people.
Ew, peopling.
Yes. And he was interviewed after publishing a book about his experiences as sexton. I believe that was his first book. And he talked about how sad and poignant it was when they had to bury babies.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep that in mind. Tuck that one away.
Yeah, I know why.
Yeah, he also talked about the feeling of being watched and being able to sense presences in the graveyard. There was like a bramble bush was haunted, and he talked about all that. I think that book might even still be available. Okay, so while he was at BYU, Chad met a woman named Tammy and married her in 1990, and they went on to have 5 children together. They lived for a long time in Utah and opened the Spring Creek Book Company in 2004, which is a publisher of LDS products for families across the world with a focus on entertaining, uplifting literature.
Oh.
Yes, that's a quote from the site. Chad's other partner in this venture, this is so weird, was only identified by the name of Douglas. And I want to say Douglas was like a graphic artist. So Chad did publish other authors, but he also published his own work frequently, which includes a series that I can only describe as religious time travel fantasy. There was also a lot of apocalyptic stuff. In 2015, Chad and Tammy moved to Idaho near the Wyoming border after Chad heard a voice telling him to move there. It did not say if that was the voice from the bramble bush in the cemetery or the voice of God or where it came from. But coming full circle, when Tammy died in 2019, she was buried in the Springville Cemetery. But we're going to come back to her death a little later on. Now, the other person we're going to talk about, Lori Noreen Cox, was born in Loma Linda, California in June of 1973. She had 3 siblings, Summer, Adam, and Alex. And I'm naming them because they come into play later. At the age of 19, she married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Yanes. They soon divorced. In 1995, at the age of 22, she married William LaGoya. I may be butchering the pronunciation. They had a son, Colby, in 1996 and divorced in 1998. In 2001, she married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., and he legally adopted Colby. They had a daughter, Tylee, together in 2002 and divorced in 2005. So buckle up, crossing the crazy town city limits. In 2007, Lori's older brother, Alex, attacked Ryan, tasered him, and threatened to kill him. He said he was protecting his sister from an abuser, but there was no evidence. I mean, I could find nothing. He was convicted in a Texas court, sentenced to 90 days in prison and 5 years of probation. He continued to obsess over his brother-in-law through letters written to his girlfriend while in jail. I mean, things like, this is his girlfriend, mind you, not his wife. He's going, go to my sister, ask her for a picture of her ex-husband so I can show it to the other inmates. Yeah. And poor Joe Ryan died of an apparent heart attack in 2018 in Arizona. So catch this. This is so fucked up. In 2018, the ex-wife, Lori, was still listed as his next of kin on apparently whatever legal documents or insurance documents. She was notified of his death. She did not tell his family.
Oh.
His family didn't find out until 5 weeks later when authorities were trying to figure out what to do with the unclaimed body. Not only did she not respond, she didn't tell his family. So the lesson here is, please update your will and your in case of emergency contacts on a regular basis.
Yeah, I feel like that happens a lot after like divorces and stuff. But
I know people who I knew a single mom who, no, I'm not throwing shade. She dated a lot. I assume she felt no need to settle down, but she had a daughter, and it was like, she was always changing. I was a Girl Scout leader. She was always changing the emergency contact or the person who it was okay. And I'm like, I really wanted to say, it's totally up to you. Whatever you want to do is your business. But for God's sake, know this person for more than a month before you allow him to pick up your child. As far as I know, nothing bad happened, but I don't know.
Right. ugh. So I don't care who you date or, how much you date,
No.
but bringing children into it is a very specific thing that needs to be
Yeah.
on its own timeline.
It does. In February of 2006, Lori married Leland Anthony Vallow, who went by the name of Charles, because of course he did.
What? Okay.
I'm like, this happens in my family, so I'm like, yeah, I got nothing. I can't.
Charles is short for Leland.
Yes. So despite being raised and continuing to be a devout Catholic, Vallow converted to the LDS Church for Lori. He had 2 sons from a previous marriage, and in 2013, he and Lori adopted his grandnephew, here we go again, Joshua Jackson Vallow. He was called JJ, thank God. In late 2014, they moved to Kauai. It appears that sometime in 2015, Lori became interested in Chad Daybell's books. She and Charles moved back to Arizona in 2016, and in the fall of 2018, Lori meets Chad at a Preparing the People event. And I had to look it up. Have you heard of Preparing the People?
No.
Okay. Preparing the People is a doomsday preparation-focused series of events, the stated goal of which is to prepare the people of this earth for the second coming of Jesus Christ. Chad Daybell, a keynote speaker for the event, gave lectures for the group on several occasions. So this event is where Chad first tells Lori that they had been married to each other in 7 previous lifetimes.
Okay.
I'm thinking 2 would have been enough to get sick of his shit. But when Charles, Leland/Charles, went on a business trip, this was very circumspect. Lori had a small overnight gathering at their home, as one does. Chad captivated the crowd with his unusual religious beliefs. I'm like, I'm inviting the wrong people over for dinner, obviously, for my overnight soirees. I'm like, it's 9:00. Go home.
Get out. I have to take my bra off.
Right? Oh, when I talked last week about the event I went to, I was like, I put a bra on for this. The chocolate better be good. So anyway, he said he had lived 31 different lives on different planets, and he had the ability to classify people as light or dark, depending on their affiliation with either Jesus or Satan. So I was wondering if atheists were beige, like a neutral, or maybe they were gray. But I have a feeling he just lumped them in.
Satanist.
Yeah. He also held Lori up as an example. She was an eternal being who had lived 21 previous lives, and Lori ate that shit up with a spoon. In December of 2018, Chad and Lori appeared together on a Preparing the People podcast. It's very alliterative. I just spit all over my paper. They were both deeply into apocalyptic Mormon beliefs. Let that one marinate for a minute. The apocalyptic Mormons. I didn't even know that was a thing.
I'm glad we're following up Jewish Satanists with apocalyptic Mormons.
So Lori was spending large amounts of time in the celestial room at Temple, which apparently that's a thing. I'm not throwing shade there. That's a thing.
The celestial
room at the
Here's
temple.
The thing about the post-apocalyptic, though. The Mormons I know have known store food and stuff like that.
Right.
Or when things inevitably go sideways, because they do expect it is. Like, I don't even know if that particularly is apocalyptic or just plain Mormon, right?
I always heard, they are very prepared people.
Yeah.
They always have the stored food. But when she was spending time in the celestial room at Temple, because it was easier for her to commune with the dead on the other side of the veil. Both Chad and Lori believed that frequent visits to the temple increased their vibrations, which aided their ability to teleport. Roughly a month later, Lori began telling people that her husband Charles had passed away and his body had been taken over by a zombie. So, shocker, this was in December. In February, the following year, Charles filed for divorce and also filed a protective order. He also threatened to tell Tammy, Chad's wife, if Lori didn't come clean about her affair. Lori claimed she was a god, and she was one of the 144,000 who would stand and prepare for the second coming of Christ, which they had on the calendar for July 2020. Just side note. Also that she would kill him if he got in her way. So I thought I had sort of heard this 144,000 reference before, so I had to look it up. It's a biblical reference in Revelations. These are people who have survived many trials and tribulations and are worthy to be protected as they usher in the second coming of Christ. Fun fact. This one killed me. I'm like, nobody quotes this part. They're supposed to be virgins, not defiled by women.
Oh.
Right? So she also claimed at one point to be the reincarnation of Joseph Smith, who was the founder of the LDS Church.
Yeah.
And she demonstrated her holy superiority. All right, I'm getting snarky now. By stealing Charles's truck and $35,000 and disappearing for 58 days. Charles had also filed for custody of JJ, who had special needs. And that was not, we were just talking about this, that was not really defined in the stuff that I was looking at. So that's on file. And Ty Lee, her Lori's daughter. But because Ty Lee was not his biological daughter and he hadn't adopted her, he had no rights to look out for her welfare. Despite the fact Mom thought she was holy and threatening to kill people. Working with Lori's brother Adam, Charles planned an intervention for Lori, which would have included revoking her access to the LDS temple. But in July of 2019, Charles was shot and killed in Arizona by her brother Alex, who claimed self-defense. By the way, Ty Lee and JJ witnessed the murder. And Chad's wife, Tammy, who we talked about earlier, on October 9th of 2019, she was shot at in her driveway by a masked man with a paintball gun. 10 days later, she died in her home, Chad said, of natural causes, in her sleep. He said she had a bad cough when she went to bed.
Okay.
Yeah. Chad initially refused to have Tammy autopsied, but 2 months later, she was exhumed, and officials learned that she had actually been strangled. Yeah. And then I got down this rabbit hole of what's the difference between disinterred and exhumed. It's not important. In December of that same year, Alex, who had attacked two of her husbands, died from blood clots and high blood pressure, despite a special blessing Chad had given him, declaring he had a great mission to fulfill and would have 9 angels protecting him. I do want to point out, Alex was fairly young when he died. I don't think he was 50 yet. So,
well, but he was a pretty wound up person. So your cause of death sounds really.
And he was, at some point, he was married briefly. His wife, his ex-wife, was referred to only by first name, so I didn't include it. She came forward with information that Alex had detailed to her his sexual relationship with his sister. So I don't know if that was fact or not. But wait, you're thinking, where are the kids in all of this? On September 24th of 2019, Lori told JJ's school that she would now be homeschooling him. The last video recording of him alive is doorbell cam footage from the day before when he was playing with a friend. Ty Lee was last seen on September 18th of 2019 in Yellowstone with JJ, Lori, and Uncle Alex. It appears that in October, she sent 2 Venmo payments to an older half-brother, Colby Ryan, but his attempts to contact her after that went unanswered, and he was one of the reasons he was agitating, because apparently they were close and stayed in contact, but he couldn't get her to respond. So 2 weeks after Tammy's death on November 5th, Chad and Lori were married in Hawaii. Near Thanksgiving, police began searching for the children at the insistence of JJ's grandmother to do a welfare check. Acquaintances reported that Lori had begun telling people that the children had, wait for it, died and been replaced by zombies. The same day that the police began this search, Lori and Alex packed up her house and abandoned it. After being given several different stories by Lori, police were unable to locate either child. A family friend came forward stating she'd been asked to lie and say the kids were with her. And they discovered that Lori had a storage locker and it was full of JJ's and Tylee's belongings. Like it was their bicycle and their books and their photo. It was just like all of their personal belongings had just been shoved into this storage locker. So in February of 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii for desertion and non-support of dependent children. Bail was set at $5 million, but was reduced to $1 million after she was extradited back to Idaho. She had difficulty posting bail because local bail bonds people refused to work with her. I'm like, well, that sounds perfectly fine with me. It wasn't until June 9th when the police discovered human remains buried at Chad's home. They were identified the next day. It was JJ and Tylee. And after lengthy autopsies, and by lengthy, so Shannon and I got a chance to go meet with our county coroner. It was a little presentation. It wasn't little. It was 4 hours. Here's something I didn't know. The average autopsy, I think he said, takes an hour, roughly. So for JJ, the autopsy took 4 hours, and they noted that it was an extremely long autopsy. The autopsy for Tylee took 7 days.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So both were determined to be murder victims. Both Chad and Lori were charged and initially were to be tried together. That was one of the delays in this case. On March 3rd of this year, 2023, a judge severed the cases and Lori was tried first. I was waiting for that trial she was found guilty. I was waiting for this, for everything to get through before I talked about it. On May 12th of this year, the jury found Lori Vallow guilty on all 7 charges placed on her, including 3 counts of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of grand theft. So the conspiracy was Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, and the 2 counts of first-degree murder was Tylee and JJ. So and there's a lot of talk about surrounding this case about her falling for this cult leader. And I'm like, if it hadn't been him, it would have been somebody else. Mm-hmm. She, the relationship with her brother who kept attacking her husbands and eventually killed one of them. It was a horrible story. She basically killed her children so she could be with this fucking Fruit Loop. I mean, neither one of them is sane.
When they did these big autopsies, were they finding signs of abuse or?
It did not say.
Okay.
And I don't know. Here's a fun fact. Coroners are one thing. Because my question was, remember Tammy had been strangled? Uh-huh. And they didn't find that until they exhumed her 2 months later. So I'm wondering if she had been strangled, there obviously had to be signs of it. And I thought, well, why didn't whoever performed the funeral, assuming I do not know the LDS funeral practices at all, but I'm thinking, why wouldn't the funeral home director, undertaker, whatever you want to call them, why wouldn't they report it? Fun fact, they are not, what's it called, a required reporter?
Yeah, first reporters or whatever. But anyway, no, like I know what you're saying.
Teachers if teachers see it, they have to report it. Doctors and nurses, if they see it, they have to report it. There are groups of people who, if they see it, they have to report it. So I'm thinking if she went to a funeral home, surely they noticed the strangulation marks, but nothing was said at that time. So I don't know.
Okay, interesting.
But then I had to go online and look it up, and it's like, no, they are not required reporters. My sources were, of course, as always, Wikipedia. the Deseret News, KSL TV5, Wheeler's Book Industry website, Newsweek, the UK Independent, Fox 10 Phoenix, HolySpiritSpeaks.org. I had to look up the 144,000, and the Arizona Central newspaper. I just hope that when Chad is going through his trial, that his punishment is equal to hers.
Yeah.
Or worse. I'd be okay with worse, too. More severe punishment.
One hopes. In the meantime, everything about Chad is alleged. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just insert that word. Alleged.
Allegedly.
But you didn't actually say that he'd done anything, actually. So it's all good.
No. I mean, now, granted, his first wife died of strangulation. I didn't say that he did it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, this has been a huge topic in like the true crime Facebook pages and stuff that I'm in. It's on all talk about this. And I feel like that's natural when children are involved, right? And the people are doubly horrified when it's a parent involved in the death of a child and so on and so forth. But other than that, sometimes I just have no idea why one thing is more important in the news and in social media and stuff than another thing.
And I mean, in this one, like I said, it's two pretty white people. You know, she's got big blonde hair and a big smile. And
so that's probably part of it. Okay, so I am doing the mysterious disappearance of Jerry Stomps. This does
what does Jerry Stomps?
Right?
All
That's
right.
the last name. I love that last name, but I have to tell you, looking up this crime with the last name of Stomps brought up some weird and some actually truly horrifying, things that I was like, no.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us it brought you up some really weird porn.
Nope. We're just murders, just stomping. In one case of stomping on a baby.
Oh.
So I was like, now you see what I was pulling up, right? Right.
Oh,
okay.
God. I'm sorry.
But his last name is Stomps, Stomps. On February 6, 2009, a couple guys driving alongside a creek by Oxbow Park in Gresham, Oregon, happened to catch sight of a woman's hand flagging them down from the hill beside the road where she'd been trying to climb up from the riverbank. So they legit just saw like a hand sticking up above the roadway there off the side. They were able to help her up and call 911 to get her to a hospital, where it was found that Lynn, and her actual name is Hazel Lynn, but it's funny, every article called her Hazel Lynn, but she was on her story was on 2 TV shows, and they always just called her Lynn. So legitimately, anything that was a news story or anything that was verbal, they called her Lynn, so I couldn't see how to actually pronounce her name. But anyway, they found she had a broken pelvis. She told authorities,
crawling up a riverbank with a broken pelvis.
She said it took her 2 hours, which I mentioned later. So look, I just outed something I was already going to say. But anyway, she told authorities that she and her husband, Jerry, had been meeting with a guy interested in buying a boat they were selling. They were going to fish while discussing the boat. The boat itself was back on their Christmas tree farm in Corbett. They didn't have the boat there. They were going to fish and talk about the boat. Only things had gone terribly wrong. Instead, 2 men attacked them, throwing her from the Gordon Creek Bridge and chasing her husband down a path into the woods. She had no idea what had happened to Jerry, and he was still missing. And again, she said she'd had to crawl for 2 hours to get to that point where she got up there to get help. As she lay in a hospital bed, police began to investigate. Sure enough, there was fishing gear down by the creek, but police couldn't find any tracks in the dirt where she said they'd chased her husband. There were no signs of a struggle, and there was only one fishing setup. 1 tackle box, 1 pole. Lynn's story kept changing, and now there were some alarm bells ringing with the police. Upon looking deeper, they discovered that no one had seen him since January 30th. Then again, her hand above there, February 6th. She claimed he'd seen and talked to some people. Like, she named all these people. Yeah, you saw this person after the 30th, and this person, and this person. Police talked to him. They went, no, we haven't seen him. And after those talks, still, the last anybody had seen him was January 30th. That and the fact that she'd gone up to Klickitat, Washington, in Jerry's car to check on their livestock without him on the 8th, which was unusual, turned their investigation in a different direction. They actually had some sort of video footage of her in his car going to that to visit their livestock. I was like, is that normal? I know people board their horses, but I do not know why their livestock were somewhere different.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I could hazard a guess, but it would
I'm like, I could theorize it, but I don't know. Their next step was to investigate her home and property. One thing they found early on was her husband's gun hanging up in the holster. It was like on the back of a door or on a hook on a wall or something like that. I just have the image in my head because I saw this first on a TV show. Their adult sons pointed out that their dad, a Vietnam veteran, never left the house without his handgun. And if he'd been meeting up with a stranger, he would have been doubly certain to have taken his handgun with him. And he was, licensed to take it with him and all of that good stuff. When police checked the gun, they found 2 spent casings in it. Again, this is not something that a gun owner is just going to leave in their gun. You clean it after you use it. You take that out. And looking closer, there appeared to be blood on the barrel of the rifle. So that went off to the lab. They were able to determine that the boat ad had in fact been placed. There was a boat ad on Craigslist, but there were no emails on his inbox asking about the boat, setting up a meeting. There was nothing like that. And she said the guy's name was Dave. Again, no communications from a guy named Dave. Dave? Dave's not here, which is the name she'd given. So there was indeed blood on the gun, both on the exterior and inside the barrel, just a fine mist, right? Indicating a close shot.
I was going to say, you have to be really close to get blood inside
that causes that blood to blow back into it. DNA testing did show the blood belonged to Jerry. The more they dug, the more they found. It came to light that Lynn had a significant amount of debt. Between 2 credit cards and a line of credit she'd taken out, Lynn owed over $54,000. She had just suddenly started secretly buying, just like spending sprees, just this weird, what came to my mind was kind of manic, because I've seen this with people with bipolar, but I'm sure there's many other reasons people do it. So nowhere is it said she's bipolar or anything like that. It's just what I thought of because of personal experience.
Have shopping. It's an addiction. For some people, it's a shopping addiction.
And it had become an addiction for her, but it had not been in the past. These people, he was 60 and she was 57. These weren't like spring chickens, right?
Right.
And Jerry didn't believe in utilizing credit cards and stuff like that. He believed in buying what you had the money for, right?
Right.
In that moment. And it soon became clear that he had no idea she'd gotten herself into this debt. He didn't know anything about it. Even more interesting, friends of Jerry's revealed that he had been talking about asking her for a divorce with them. Then Lynn's surgeon spoke with police, telling them her pelvic injury was not at all consistent with a fall from a long distance, such as off a bridge. A police officer had already noted the absence of bruises and defensive wounds when visiting her in the hospital the day of her injury. And she'd been doubting the story from the very beginning before everything else even came to light, because she said she pretty much claimed she had on some sort of backpack, and a guy she tried to run and he grabbed her backpack and spun her around, and there was just nothing indicating that she had defended herself in any way, that she had been otherwise hurt in any way. There's no backpack strap bruises. There's nothing.
I was going to say that you would expect, if he yanked her and swung her, you would expect a bruise or even abrasions.
Yeah, something that showed this. And there just wasn't in existence. They spoke with Richard Swanson. Now, this guy, he rented a small place on their property. He had like a little cabin or whatever, and he'd lived there for 15 years on their property. He'd been renting from them. He said he'd seen smoke rising before the incident. And the thing about that is the fact that he remembered that and specifically said it and knew when. I was like, so if people haven't been in Oregon, it's a big, in the rural areas, you burn your garbage. There's burn days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a burn-in barrel.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really see that here in Colorado probably because of the fire danger. It's not like Oregon doesn't have wildfires too, but I did see that in Oregon. Very prevalent.
Yeah, when I was growing up, we had a burn-in barrel. Okay.
But it did stand out to him, so maybe it wasn't burning, because there were designated burn days and stuff in Oregon. So maybe it wasn't a designated burn day. When police searched the property, they did find a burn pile, and there were bone fragments in that burn pile. And then there was a garbage can that also had small bone fragments in the bottom. They were certain these fragments were human, but couldn't be sure they were Jerry's until they tested them Sure enough, they're Jerry's bones. And some of it was determined to be his jaw bone shattered.
Oh.
So unfortunately, they only found about 10% of like his skeleton in these bones. They didn't find any of the bigger stuff. There's no skull, whole skull or anything like that. For example, they did figure that he had been shot in the head, close contact with his own weapon, and then his jaw had shattered, and that's why these jaw fragments were all over. The arrest came swiftly on February 12th, and Lynn Stomps, that's 6 days after basically Lynn Stomps reported him missing when she was found off the side of the road. She was charged with abuse of a corpse, murder, and filing a false police report. In breaking down the evidence, authorities felt that Lynn had shot, this is their theory, right? She's not talking, had shot Jerry twice, at least once at close range. She had then dismembered his body, thus the abuse of a corpse, burned it, and disposed of most of those remains. And I was like, clearly without attention to detail, like they were just bone fragments all over. After taking care of his body, she drove his truck to the park, then climbed down to plant his fishing gear so she could be like, oh, he went out. She could report him missing later, right? And then have his stuff found down there and have it nowhere near her home where this had occurred, right? And then she was going to walk the few miles home because she was in good health, right? And so she was dressed and ready to walk home and then wait until later and then call in and report that her husband had never come home and she was worried. The motive they felt was murder. The motive the motive they felt was money. That
life insurance?
$54,000. No, not even that. That $54,000 debt. Jerry would have noticed the money she was funneling from their trust to pay off her debts because he handled the finances. And maybe he already had. Who knows? Because again, there comes that talk of divorce. Well, I couldn't find out why was he wanting to. And the guy thought, well, maybe she was behaving oddly because she knew she'd gotten herself into this trouble. And she was maybe behaving different, right? They had been married 39 years at this point.
Wow.
They would have known something about each other. They would have been able to see something was off, right? And people called it a happy marriage. They liked to go camping together all the time. And there's photos and video of them going camping and stuff like that. They were outdoor folks. And so, yeah, did he know something was off? Was he just like, she's changed? Who knows? Nobody said. Had she not fallen and broken her pelvis, it probably would have worked. They would have had no reason to go search her house if he disappeared at the creek. But she fell and she broke her pelvis. I was like, osteoporosis for the win. But they didn't actually say she had it. But I was like, how do you just fall and break your pelvis like that unless you maybe have some osteoporosis going on?
I mean, she could have hit a rock or, depending on how far she fell.
Because, I mean, like, dude's going fishing, no big deal. Oh, he's disappeared. It's a creek. They didn't say it was a rushing river, but then again, we're talking about a place that has a lot of water, so who knows what they call a lake versus what we call a lake. And therefore a creek and all that good stuff. The trial didn't begin until 2011. Richard Swanson was set to testify, the guy who lived on the property and had seen the smoke. But on January 10th, police were called to his home and he had committed suicide by gun. It was not thought to be related to the crime, though some people had implied he'd helped or been a part of it because he was on the property. Police never found that to be credible. Like, at no point did they call him a suspect. And he had a history of deep depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts, and they felt this was just his, completely disconnected from the case.
Okay, they don't think she killed him.
No.
Okay.
And she might have been in custody.
Okay.
They didn't say, but I think she probably was.
Okay.
On February 12th, Lynn pled not guilty. I didn't do it. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty. That's it. 5 hours of her husband's murder. She would ultimately be sentenced to life in prison with possibility of parole after 25 years. Probably harder than the sentence was her youngest son, Adam, who addressed her in court and said, "You took someone I loved very much and you stole him away with an act so violent and evil I can't even say the words. I hope you burn in hell."
Ooh.
And I don't blame him, because always in these shows I'm always a little, conflicted when somebody's standing by a parent who's supposed to have killed their other parent, and I'm like, I get it as much as I can empathize, right? Because you've lost one parent, you don't want to lose another one. But at the same time, if I thought that one parent killed the other parent, I don't think I could forgive them.
No. How could you?
I don't know. And of course, if we're not in this situation, we don't know. But so this,
True.
I'm like, this makes sense. And both of her sons do feel fully that she was responsible. Like, that has not been a question. The evidence was just there. Her oldest son, Jason, was dealing with the financial aftermath of what she'd done. There was no further news on how that had gone for him. It said at one point he made a statement to a newspaper because her attorney, one of his big defenses is, why would she kill him for money when they had $190,000 in the bank? Well, because she was a woman who appearances were a big thing and she knew she'd done wrong, right? And she didn't want this to come out. She didn't want him to find out or whatever. But he said, since he'd taken over having to pay for stuff, that $190,000 went like quick for basically debts. I mean, they had livestock that were being boarded somewhere. They had, or were on another property. They had their farm, and that would have had costs. So it's not like they were rich or anything. So it was a stupid defense.
But and how sad that she had this spending problem, and instead of being able to talk to him about it,
right,
she kills him.
Yeah. So I feel like there was something wrong in this marriage already for it to reach this point and for her to not feel, and there's just no details on it because I'm going to address this again, but she's not talking. And the thing is, people may not realize, out of all my grandparents, only one of them was a native Oregonian. And the native Oregonians I've known, it's very kind of pioneer woman. You're locked down, you're strong. You take care of everybody. You don't complain. You don't talk about the things that are wrong. They're just very button-lipped. If my grandma had killed my grandpa, she would have been able to she wouldn't have, she loved him, but she would have been able to keep her mouth shut.
Yep.
And that is exactly what Lynn is doing. So I don't know if she was a native Oregonian. It said Jerry was. There was more background about him, and that's fair because he was the victim. So I don't know if she was. It seemed like she might be. So if she is, I know that type of woman is what I'm saying, and she probably will never talk. There's never going to be an answer here.
That's so hard on the kids.
Yeah. And I'm just like, it sucks too that he was then having to deal with this money, and he probably had to figure out how to pay off her debts. So I'm just hoping that because there was that property and the livestock and stuff, it was something he could sell off and pay for that and not have to also take the brunt of his mother's financial decisions.
Oh, God. Yeah. That's
and I don't know what the financial legalities in any of this are. So unfortunately for him also, he was an early suspect, and it cost him significantly. He said that it contributed to him losing custody of his kids because he had been a suspect in the murder of his father, and it hurt him professionally. So she really kind of screwed her son over here.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So like I've already said, she's kept quiet on her motives, and I just don't think she'll ever talk. Well, friends of Jerry's have said there were plenty of people who didn't like him. They said he could be an asshole, and there are people who didn't like him. They never expected Lynn to kill him. Like everybody they talked to who knew them was surprised. So to me, that said there wasn't marital strife that they could see that was bad, right? Like there wasn't abuse that anybody saw. Her sons didn't say there was abuse or anything like that. And if there was, maybe they would have defended her, so just to put that out there.
It sounds like they're saying, we're not surprised somebody killed him, but we're surprised she killed him.
Yes. Yes. Which I'm like, yeah. The family feels it was a mix of her financial situation and the fact that he wanted a divorce. So maybe he had said something to it, or maybe she sensed something was going on. Again, 39 years is a long time to be married. And they said she was big on appearances. So divorce was not an option, which I find interesting. He was actually an ordained minister and had done that for a while. He'd done a lot of jobs. He was a hardworking man. But that she wouldn't want to be that divorced woman. That wouldn't have been okay for her. And so I imagine if appearances were that big for her, her debt also would have been something she didn't want getting out. So I hope she's super ashamed now, because it came out because she murdered her husband. Luckily, lawyers did not have to provide a motive to prove that the murder. They had so much other evidence that they didn't have to prove a motive.
And just imagine if she had died of exposure out there after she broke her pelvis.
Right? It would have been karmic.
But
they never would have known.
It?
That's the thing. Would they have gone and looked at the house if they saw that
I guess
the two of them had something had happened there?
They might think that he had killed his wife and run off.
Right? Wouldn't that have been ironic? Makes you think about some other situations you see that you have the theories, but you don't have the actual facts. Jerry's family were finally given those small remains to bury in March 2011. Nobody there, I think over 70 family members came out to celebrate him, and nobody mentioned Lynn's name at all while they were there. Sources, KGWA, that's just Oregon News. The Oregonian, KATU, again, one of the news affiliates there, and the Cinemaholic, which has some good information. I heard this story on and I guess I should probably cite Deadly Wives and Snapped. She's been on both of those, and I think I saw it on Deadly Wives, even though I've watched Snapped. I don't remember that story from that, but I play those a lot of time in the background, and so I miss a lot of stuff. Every little while something gets through. But I was just like, I heard this story, and I'm like, the story she weaved, and just the fact that it all went under because she fell and broke her pelvis while she was trying to set up a crime. It's just like, good job, lady.
Crime does not pay.
Whoops.
Oopsie.
So that is the story of Jerry Stomps. It's good with the murder, but then there would have been no mystery.
And something that Joe often says is that you don't know what happens in somebody else's marriage.
Right.
You don't know what that's like. So he could have been, Jerry could have been a real asshole, and she
right. If he was an asshole to other people, why wouldn't he have been considered an asshole to her? Who knows? Yeah. So I think in this case, but again, I don't think we're ever going to know, because she's not going to talk and say, well, he was a dick.
Yeah.
She's not going to say anything. She's already in prison. So why bother? Even though we have this person living, it's just a big mystery. But yeah, I was thinking through it, and I'm like, if he was a jerk and maybe he had problems from being a veteran, maybe he had PTSD. We don't know.
So
what all that looked like.
When did this happen?
This was 2009.
Okay. So 14 years ago. So if she was 57, she's in her early 70s now.
Mm-hmm. But it's 25 years before she's up for parole. So it truly is a life sentence.
Yes. But I'm thinking she may have something to say when her time is drawing near.
She might, and she might not.
And she might not.
I don't think my grandma ever would have said anything had she done something like that. She didn't. She wouldn't. But
right.
She was just stiff upper lip.
I think for some people, there's that whole, you're getting ready, you're about to die, it's coming soon. And so you get something off your chest.
Yeah.
But she may not feel like she has anything to get off her chest.
Yeah. One of the, maybe it was a daughter-in-law or a sister-in-law, I don't remember. It might have been her sister-in-law, said, I don't think she's talking because I think she's happy she killed him. And that was one of her quotes in the paper. Ooh. But she didn't go more into that, or they didn't print more into that. So, but she was like, yeah, she's glad she killed him. I don't think she has any regrets. And she didn't express any regrets, not even to her son.
That's bizarre.
Right? So, not even for taking their dad away from them. And I'm like, she can't be a sociopath. Somebody surely would have noticed that at some point.
Yeah, that would have seeped out through the cracks.
They'd been like, she was terrible our whole life. So I don't know. Yeah. So that's one of those things that it doesn't have to be a mystery, but I think it's sure going to be.
Yeah. There's so much to think about there.
All right. So thank you guys for listening, tuning in, and we'll talk at you next week. Bye.
Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram, or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.